Cinema and literature has long held a morbid fascination with some of the most unsavory characters in history, from horrific serial killers to violent criminals that have unleashed a campaign of pain and torment on the population. Those that have been kept behind bars have been a reminder to us all. Here's the 10 most dangerous prison inmates in the world. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to The Supreme, and click the notification bell for more lit content. Let's get rolling. Number 10. Moonlight Man. Alright, for our first dangerous prison inmate, we've got to turn your attention toward this image that was recently sent in to our team when we were compiling our list. At first glance, it may appear to be one of the most terrifying prisoners imaginable. In fact, it has long appeared on the internet as a visual accompaniment alongside tales from prisons across the planet. Just take one look and you'll know exactly why he's behind bars. Impossibly tall, gaunt, like something straight out of a horror film. The truth is, though, that's exactly what he is. Straight out of 2017's Gerald's Game, a movie based on the novel of the same name by King. This character, the Moonlight Man, was played by the awesome Dutch actor. As well as playing one of the most terrifying prisoners in recent times, he's also played Lurch from the Addams Family and the Giant from Twin Peaks. While his time spent as a dangerous prisoner was purely fictional, visually speaking, he certainly lived up to his reputation. Number 9. Mark Chopper Reed. Although he passed away from liver cancer in 2013, Mark Chopper Reed may well be one of Australia's most dangerous and violent career criminals. He became so notorious for his criminal methodologies that a film was made about his life, starring Eric Bana in the titular role. Reed was born on November 17, 1954, to a former veteran of the Korean War and his mother, a devout Seventh-day Adventist. From an early age, he was placed into a children's home, where he grew up in the hard-knock Melbourne suburbs of Collingwood, Thomastown, Fitzroy, and Preston. As a young adult, Chopper was a notorious street fighter, and he became a leader of the Surrey Road Gang. He began his criminal career by robbing drug dealers from around Australia and then violently torturing them until they paid out. He would often use a blowtorch and bolt cutters to commit his violent deeds. Astoundingly, Reed spent only 13 months outside of prison between the ages of 20 and 38. He was convicted of armed robbery, firearms offenses, assault, arson, impersonating a police officer, and kidnapping. At one point while behind bars, he had both his ears cut off just to get out of his cell block. Mark Chopper Reed is the definition of a dangerous prison inmate. Number 8. The Red Ripper. Romanikov Chikatilo may well be the most violent and deranged serial killer of the Soviet era, also known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper. He was convicted of the sexual assault, mutilation, and murder of at least 43 women and children between 1978 and 1990 in the former Soviet Union. During his trial, he confessed to 56 murders, although he refused to provide adequate evidence as to where he had buried the bodies. Ultimately, the Red Ripper was sentenced to death in October of 1992, but it wasn't until later that the gravity of his depraved and hellish deeds were fully realized. For over a decade, in the most remote parts of Russia, the Red Ripper roamed between small mining towns and impoverished cities committing his foul crimes. It's thought that the true extent of how many lives he took during this time is still unknown. He remains one of Russia's most notorious historical serial killers. Number 7. Charles Bronson. Another notorious criminal who gained such a reputation that they had a film made about their life, in this case played by Tom Hardy in 2008's Bronson. Throughout his life, Charles Bronson had gone by many names. Born as Michael Gordon Peterson in 1952, he earned the bulk of his reputation going by Charleston Bronson, based on the famous American actor of the same name. Currently, he goes by Charles Arthur Salvador, but whatever the title, he is an English career criminal who has been labeled by the British press as the most violent prisoner in Britain as of 2019. Charles Bronson is currently incarcerated at H.M. Woodhill in Milton Keynes, England, but he has been a resident at some of the most notorious and grisly prisons in the country. His list of convictions includes armed robbery, criminal damage, grievous bodily harm, blackmail, and false imprisonment. And while in and out of prison, he became a legendary bare-knuckle boxer in the East End of London. Although serving a sentence of life imprisonment, he has recently turned to art and painting to work out his inner conflicts. Number 6. Ted Kaczynski. You'd be hard-pressed to find people that would argue against the genius of this man. In fact, among criminals, Ted Kaczynski has a mind like no other. However, what he chose to do with that intellect takes things to a whole different level. You may have already heard of Kaczynski, otherwise known as the Unabomber, who deployed a campaign of incendiary explosive devices across the United States of America. Born in Chicago in 1942, Theodore John Kaczynski is currently incarcerated at ADX Florence in Colorado, one of the most impenetrable prisons on the planet, otherwise referred to as a supermax facility. The Unabomber was convicted on 10 counts of mailing and transporting bombs, as well as 3 counts of murder. He's currently serving 8 consecutive life prisons without the possibility of parole. Krasinski was a math prodigy, but his intellect quickly became derailed by a seething hatred for the U.S. government, and instead he sought to cause chaos and destruction. Number 5. Thug Behram. In India, one of the oldest criminal organizations in the history of the planet are a group known as the Thuggis. Believed to have been active as early as the 1300s, their criminal activities were so widespread that the word thug is believed to have been derived from the Sanskrit term for them. Their most famous criminal leader, though, a man named Thug Behram, who was active between the 18th and early 19th centuries, was considered to be the most dangerous and violent prisoner of all time. In fact, he's often cited as the world's most prolific serial killer, believed to have been involved in 931 murders, all of them strangulations, between 1790 and 1840. After his capture by the East India Company, who were active on the continent at that time, the British organization were so afraid of the inmate and his wealth of crimes that he was allegedly tied with rope and kept in a well until they knew what to do with him. Although he was executed shortly after his imprisonment, Thug Behram certainly earned his place as one of the most dangerous prison inmates of all time. Number 4. Michael Swango. In perhaps one of the most heinous cases of a medical serial killer, Joseph Michael Swango is responsible for the murders of over 60 people, including many of his co-workers, friends, and his own wife, and is believed to have been tied to countless more vile crimes. As a trusted doctor, Michael Swango abused his position to give him easy access to his victims, often poisoning his vulnerable patients through their IV drips. Swango began his medical career as an intern at Ohio State in 1983. After his assignment to the university's medical center, shortly after he began, there was a series of unexplained deaths among several healthy patients being cared for on his wing. Astonishingly, Swango would somehow manage to maintain a career in the medical industry for several more decades, despite being in and out of prison for unrelated charges. Finally, in 2000, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Dr. Death is serving that sentence at the ADX Florence Supermax prison, although many of his crimes are still unaccounted for. Number 3. Charles Manson. Up until his death in 2017, the influence that Charles Manson still managed to demonstrate from behind bars of some of the most secure prison units in the U.S. gave authorities serious cause for concern. For most of his early life, Manson was an unemployed ex-convict who had spent time in and out of correctional institutions across California. During this time, he became obsessed with the Beatles, particularly their 1968 self-titled record, also known as the White Album. Through their songs, he claimed to have been guided by their lyrics and became deranged enough to believe that their song, Helter Skelter, was compelling him to begin an apocalyptic race war. Eventually, Manson's beliefs had gathered the attention of others, and by the late 60s, he had established a cult known as the Manson family. Ultimately, in 1969, his influence led to the murders of 9 people, and after his conviction, he was sentenced to a life term at California State Prison. Number 2. Rodney Alcala. Also known as the dating game killer, Rodney James Alcala is currently serving on death row at California State Prison. Astonishingly, he was given the alias the dating game killer after he appeared on the popular television show The Dating Game in 1978 during his most active murder spree that was believed to have taken place across 4 states in the U.S., including California, New York, Wyoming, and possibly Washington. The police have often described Alcala as a killing machine, and despite being tried and sentenced for 5 murders, his true victim count remains entirely unknown. Police suspect that it is highly likely to be much higher, possibly as many as 130 people. Born in 1943, the dating game killer became known for his vile methods of murder. He would strangle his victims until they lost consciousness before waiting for them to revive to continue the process over and over again. Once he had taken their lives, he would often arrange their corpse in strange poses before taking photographs of them. Over his murderous campaign, he compiled a collection of more than 1,000 photographs of his victims, some of which have never been identified. Rodney Alcala remains to be one of the most heinous serial killers currently kept behind bars. Number 1. Barry Mills. A criminal so notorious that his incarceration has led to some of the most violent and depraved prison riots in history. Also known as the Baron, Barry Mills was the leader of one of the most violent and depraved criminal organizations on the planet, the Aryan Brotherhood. Following his first conviction at a California state prison for armed robbery, Mills joined the gang initially as means of protection. Throughout the 70s and 80s, he quickly rose up the ranks of the Aryan Brotherhood and ultimately became their leader, where he orchestrated a system of drug dealings and violence across many prisons in the U.S. Although he died in 2018 at the age of 70, until his last days, Barry Mills was considered to be one of the most dangerous prison inmates of all time. Well, there we have the 10 most dangerous prison inmates in the world. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a thumbs up and hit that subscribe bell for our latest daily content. You've been watching The Supreme. See you next time.